So, when is Darling in the Franxx Season 2 coming out? So what's up guys, Foxen here. I've seen a bunch of chatter online and on my videos about hopes for Darling in the Franxx Season 2. But instead of when, to be honest, a better question should be, is the Season 2 sequel even possible for Darling in the Franxx? As always, it comes down to a ton of factors whether an anime gets a sequel or not. Darling in the Franxx in particular is special since it is an original production. There is no source material. But actually, this makes it simple. The real question is this series making money? Let's go ahead and look at the figures in depth. First off, how are the Blu-ray sales for Darling in the Franxx? And yes, let me quickly mention that Blu-ray sales are getting less and less important. Anyway, for Darling in the Franxx Volume 1, in the first week this came out, it sold about 5,200 copies. And then by the second week, about 6,000. Keep in mind that this first volume also had this extra little incentive, since it was bundled with Darling in the Franxx Soundtrack Part 1. Alright, so a little later you have Darling in the Franxx Volume 2. This one took a little bit of a dip, it sold about 4,500 copies. So far, those are really the only figures we could go by. Let me just say that at about $80 per Blu-ray disc, I really can't blame any fans for not buying. Pretty pricey. But anyway, you have about 6,000 and 4,000. How does this actually compare? Let me bring up a little anime you may be familiar with from Trigger. On average, Kill la Kill sold about 9,000 copies per Blu-ray volume. And nowadays, just selling around the 5 to 7k area, that's really seen as being alright. You really have to pass that 10k mark if you really want to impress anyone. So overall, Blu-ray sales have not been fantastic. On the bright side, let me mention Manga Sales. Even though Darling in the Franxx is an original series, naturally a companion manga has been made just to squeeze out a few more cash. Just last month, the official Twitter page for Darling in the Franxx announced how the manga series has sold over 400,000 copies. That is super impressive. Not only because there's only 2 volumes out so far. I mean, this is based off an original property. Usually manga for this does not sell well at all, or at least not this high. For this, let me mention that it does help a lot that there's a ton of fan service in the manga version of Darling in the Franxx. Basically, a ton of uncensored boobage. Unsurprisingly, this is pretty popular in Japan, although I think this is popular anywhere. Going forward, I really don't see this changing for future manga volumes, so sales should remain fairly high. At least here in Japan, each time they release the volume, it's pretty out there in front of the stores, so they are in a good position to sell more. Also, one thing you should notice about these numbers is that they do give you this much better fan figure compared to the people buying the expensive ass Blu-ray discs. Anyway, as for other sales, let's talk about other Darling merch. Good Smile has already announced several figures for 02 and even her Franxx. Oh, and there is even an Ichigo figure coming. That should be fun. Personally, I definitely want to pick a lot of these up. The question is, are you also planning to pick any 02 figures? Let me also mention that here in Japan I have seen several other smaller merch, but there's not that much. I'm sure going forward that at least a little more will come out. So overall for this, manga, extremely good sales. Merch, it's really hard to track, but at least some stuff is coming out. If you don't see anything for a particular series, that is a really bad sign. Now let me get into the possible problems preventing a Darling in the Franxx Season 2. First off, the story in Darling. It really seems like they're wrapping everything up in these last 5 episodes. The director of Darling in the Franxx himself even mentioned that the ending had already been decided. Now, this doesn't mean that there cannot be more after the story is done, but the story they did plan is coming to its original conclusion. Next up, second possible issue. Darling in the Franxx is this collaboration with the Trigger Studio and A1 Studio. In case you're not familiar with Trigger, they don't really have a track record for making sequels. Now, let's ignore that and say they do want to go ahead and make a sequel. Now you run into the issue of these 2 studios finding the time to make this. It is possible, but now this prevents a different challenge. Of course, one way around this would be if one studio took on the full project sequel altogether. This of course would have had to be in a decision by the production committee. This I highly doubt though. And then the third possible issue. Just what is the fan reaction going to be like at the end of the series? Will it be positive? Or will there be another overreaction online backlash, just like there was with the whole Ichigo thing? And hopefully the whole Ichigo backlash thing didn't cause damage already. Just seeing right now where the series is going, it's very likely that a few characters will be dropping off near the end, and the fan favorite couple possibly may not happen. This is why I don't see everyone being happy when everything is said and done. You might be wondering, why is this important? And hopefully you could think of a couple of reasons why. But a large part of this will be how it affects future sales. Right now there is some merch out here in Japan, with hopefully a lot more to come. Although as always, this stuff is coming out later in the year, way past once the series is done. I do want to pre-order a bunch of these, but whether I do actually pre-order some or not, really depends on how I feel once Darling in the Franxx is done. I think there's a good chunk of people in this camp too. I mean, just think about it. If Darling in the Franxx ends and you don't feel happy about it, are you really going to drop $40, $60, or $100 more on this series? Probably not. So, back to the original question. Is Darling in the Franxx Season 2 possible? Well, with everything I mentioned about the studios and the story concluding soon, it's honestly pretty unlikely. I would really be shocked if this got a Season 2 announcement. Although all hope is not lost. Even though Darling in the Franxx Season 2 is pretty unlikely, the manga sales have been so strong that they'll likely continue long past the anime series. They're gonna release pretty slow anyway. There's also a chance for some OVA episodes, or some extra anime special episodes on the Blu-rays. I mean, there was an OVA even for Kill la Kill. I wouldn't be surprised if they actually did some short spin-off story in a spin-off manga series. All of this of course depends on how Darling in the Franxx ends. Who will still be around at that time? Will 02 and Hiro still be together? But anyway, let me hear your thoughts. Do you even want to see a Season 2 for Darling in the Franxx? Or are you satisfied? Can they possibly wrap up this story in a few more episodes? Or do you think Darling in the Franxx shouldn't be stretched out longer than needed? Also, are you buying any Darling in the Franxx merch, like the figures or manga? Definitely let me know if you bought anything. Anyway, definitely give this a Klaxosaur thumbs up and subscribe. You can watch over 5 anime videos here every week. That includes my weekly breakdowns for Darling in the Franxx, My Hero Academia Season 3, and the SAO GGO spin-off. By the way, you don't want to miss my breakdown for the new Darling in the Franxx episode this week. Check that out and I'll see you guys later.